Hello, scholars. Welcome to lesson 2 of our study of Elizabethan England. Our objectives for today. We will learn about Harry being crowned king and becoming known as Henry VIII. And we will learn about the 6 wives of Henry VIII and the fates of each of the wives. When we last had class, Henry VII had died, and Harry had been named the King of England at age 17, before he and Catherine of Aragon had even married. Harry was crowned as King Henry VIII. He married Catherine, and the two of them could have sons, which would allow the crown to pass peacefully on to a boy who would grow up to become the next ruler, Henry IX. Now remember, that was the goal of the Tudor family line, to continue having sons so that those sons could grow up to rule England, and those sons would have sons who would grow up and rule England, and those sons would have. I know, you get it. But scholars, that's not what happened. Several years went by, and Catherine did have a baby, but the baby was a girl, whom they named Mary. Now, remember, at this time, a girl couldn't inherit the throne. Henry VIII needed a son, a boy who would grow up to become King Henry IX. Well, Henry VIII was getting more and more worried about continuing that family line, the line of Tudor family rule. But Catherine was getting too old to have any more children, and Henry was growing very desperate to have a son. He needed another wife. But scholars, no one got divorced back in those days. So Henry VIII could only marry another woman if Catherine died. But Catherine was perfectly healthy. So Henry needed another solution. He had only been able to marry Catherine in the first place because the Pope had given him special permission to marry his dead brother Arthur's wife. Everyone remember that from our last lesson? Right? They had to get special permission to get married because Catherine had been married to Arthur. So Henry's thinking, if the Pope said that permission, that special permission, did not count, it would really be like he and Catherine had never really been married at all, even though it was now over 18 years later. So he sought permission, or sought the Pope to say that the permission didn't count. But the Pope refused to take back that special permission, which caused an argument between them. And Henry then broke England away from the Pope and the Catholic Church and created his own church called the Church of England. And he made himself the supreme head of the Church of England. With that new title, he granted himself permission to divorce Catherine. So he sent her away and he married a new, younger wife. This new, younger wife was named Anne Boleyn. They lived together happily for a little while, and Anne had a baby girl as well, named Elizabeth. Remember, he doesn't believe that a girl can inherit the throne. He needs a son. So now Henry has two daughters, but still no sons. He hoped that Anne would have a baby boy, but when she didn't, he had her beheaded. This would allow him to get married again and hopefully have a son with wife number three. So, just 2 weeks after Anne was beheaded, Henry married his third wife, Jane Seymour. And a year and a half later, Jane Seymour and Henry VIII did have a baby, a boy, and they named him Edward. Henry VIII finally had a son, an heir to the throne, a boy to rule after him, continue the Tudor family rule. But he no longer had a wife. Jane Seymour died shortly after giving birth to Edward. It was quite common at this time of history, scholars, for women and even babies to die in childbirth, right? The medical care that we have today was not available then. So it was very common for complications from childbirth to take the mother and sometimes even the baby. Now, you might be thinking, no big deal. He has a son now. Right? That's true. But Edward was a sickly baby, and Henry was worried about Edward living to adulthood and taking over the throne. So Henry didn't mourn long for Jane before he decided he would need to get married again and have another son. He sent artists all around Europe. Why? To paint portraits of princesses he might want to marry. When he saw the portrait of a beautiful German princess named Anne of Cleves, he pointed to it and he said, "Bring me this woman. I'll marry her." Anne of Cleves arrived in England on a cold, gray winter day, the day that would be their wedding. Henry rushed out to meet her, but when he saw her and met her, he changed his mind. He realized that the painter of the portrait had made her look far too pretty, and that she looked nothing like the portrait that he had seen. Henry exclaimed, "She looks like a horse." But the wedding had already been planned, and Henry was afraid that Anne's relatives would be angry with England if he didn't marry her. So he went through with the wedding. But after the wedding, he announced that he would never live with her. And since he was the supreme head of the Church of England, he could also declare his own marriage to be over. So he did. He divorced Anne of Cleves, and she happily left the castle. After all, Henry VIII is no longer the handsome, athletic prince that he once was. He's now quite a bit older and he's gotten extremely fat. But what this means, scholars, is that once again, Henry VIII is in need of a wife. He was now 49 years old by this time and just had the one sickly son. Remember, he's worried that this son is not going to live long enough to be his successor to the throne. Just 3 weeks after divorcing Anne of Cleves, he married Catherine Howard, whose family was a part of the royal court. But Catherine Howard also did not give him a son. He was getting older and still wanted that other son. And since Catherine Howard was not giving him a son, he again felt like he wanted another wife. In order to clear the path for yet another wife, he had Catherine Howard charged with treason, which is a crime of acting out against the ruler of a country or against the government of the country. She was found guilty of treason and was beheaded, all at the command of her own husband, Henry VIII. Less than a year later, Henry VIII got married for the last time. Now, by this time, he was more in need of a caretaker or a nurse than a wife. He was an old man and was often sick. He had a pussy sore on his leg from an old wound and had developed what's called gout. So he married Catherine Parr, who was a good nurse to him. She was also a good caretaker for Henry's three children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Catherine Parr would go on to be Henry's sixth and final wife. Henry VIII, you see, died at the age of 55 in 1547. This is while Catherine was still married to him and caring for his children. It is said that she survived him, which means that he died while they were married. Henry was survived by his wife, Catherine Parr, and his three children, meaning they were alive at the time of his death. So, scholars, Henry VIII has died. Who will become the ruler of England? Well, you're going to have to find that out next time because this is today where we're going to stop. That brings me to a little chant that you've perhaps heard before about the fates of Henry VIII's wives. It goes like this: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Let's review that. Ready? Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That, scholars, is a famous chant about the fates of Henry VIII's wives. You'll want to remember that. Share it with your family tonight at dinner, perhaps. Let's review our work from today. So, we learned today about Harry being crowned king and become known as Henry VIII. And we learned in that role as king, he continued his father's quest to want to continue the line of Tudor family rule, handing the crown to his son, who would then hand it to his son, who would then hand it to his son, continuing the line of Tudor family rule over England forever. Then we also learned about the six wives of Henry VIII, why he left or what happened to each of those wives, the fates of each of those wives, and why he married six different times. Keep in mind that chant, which will help you, right? Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Now to today's assignment. You'll want to open the attached Google form, answer the questions about today's lesson, and remember, you can go back into the slideshow, listen to information again, look at the slides again. When you're finished, remember to click Submit at the bottom of the Google form. Good luck, and I'll continue with you on our next lesson to find out who is going to succeed Henry VIII as ruler of England.